Welcome to episode 6 of our screencast on building a social networking site using the ColdFusion on Wheels framework. In this episode, we'll style our forms and make them look a little less messy. If you're anything like me, this form's been kind of bugging me the whole time that I've been developing it, because if you look at this, all of these text fields are all on a single line, and it's pretty unstandard to have a radio button appear after the label, and all of these are on the same line too, which is kind of confusing. So what we're going to do is fix that. So what I'm going to do is open config settings again, and what we can do is set what are called global defaults for these form helpers. And what this allows us to do is override any of the arguments values with our own defaults. So if you're not happy with a Wheels default for virtually any function, whether it be in the model view or controller, you can set a global default for it and override it for your entire application. So I'm going to create a comment that says form helpers, and just like we did with data source up here, we're going to call it the set function, except this time we're going to pass it an argument called function name, and let's pass that text field. So let's change the text fields first, and we'll pass it a label placement. This is an argument that all text fields take, so let's override it. It defaults to around, which means that the label tag will wrap the form field too. I don't really want that, so I'm going to set that to before. I want the label tag to be before it, but not to wrap the form field itself. I also want to wrap it in div tags. Again, this is my preference for how I want the form to be marked up. There may be some other way that you want to do it, and that's what's great about this, is it's flexible and suits your needs. So one argument that it takes is prepend to label, since the label goes first, and let's pass it an opening div tag. And then we'll do append because we're appending to the form field itself, and I'll pass that a closing div. And then let's also append to label, and let's give it a break tag. So like with any default, I need to reload my application, so I'll click this reload link in the footer, and notice that now our text fields are on separate lines. And if we look at the source code that was generated, you can see that there's now a div tag before the label, there's the line break after the label, and here's the closing div tag, and it applied that to all of my text fields. So let's do the same thing for password field. So I'm just going to copy and paste this because I want the same behavior. And again, if I reload, now the passwords are the way I want them to look. Now let's fix the radio buttons. So if you remember, the helper for that is called radio button. And this time I want for the label to appear after, so I'll pass it a value of after. And since the form field is now first, I'll pass it prepend instead of prepend to label. And then I'll append to label my closing div. And if I reload, look at that, now the form field is actually before the label, which is exactly what I want. But one thing that you may notice is that now this text box is below the label, which I think looks funky. We want to preview the URL, so let's fix that. And what we can do is open the view template itself at user-register.cfm, and what we can do is override that append to label, which defaults, if you remember, to the breaking tag. I'm just going to pass it an empty string to override that. And if I reload again, now it's all on the same line. So that's pretty awesome. I'd also want to style this a little so that these are less crammed up against each other. And as you may have guessed, in style sheets, we can create our own style sheet. So I've just created some basic styles, changed the font, gave a little bit of spacing for the divs within the form. So how do we apply this style sheet then? Within the views folder, I'll cover layouts later, but just know that there's a default layout for your entire application at views layout.cfm. And you'll notice that there's a call to content for layout. This basically represents your view template. So when we loaded user register.cfm, that's represented here. So this is like a placeholder for your view. So what I'm going to do, let's move these CF outputs to the outside. And in our HTML, we can add a head tag. And what I'm going to do is call a helper called style sheet link tag. And I can just pass that the name of my CSS file, which was styles.css. I don't have to include the .css part. And let me just format this to my liking. So now on every page we'll have a head tag, and also my styles call for div ID wrapper. So I'll do that. So let's reload. Okay, now you can see that my styles have been applied. So if we look at the source code, it added my head tag, and here's a link tag that it added, and it set everything for me, and everything's in the wrapper. So there it is. For more information on global defaults and layouts, visit cfwheels.org.